All right, welcome everyone. My name is Shelby Lamar. I'm the Assistant Director of the Preparing Future Faculty Program at CGU. My pronouns are they, them. And if you don't know about the Preparing Future Faculty Program, we actually offer a lot of services at CGU. We offer a college teaching certificate where you can get that put on your transcript, and it's an actual certificate to show that you've been through some significant training on how to be a faculty member with pedagogy background and setting up and designing courses. We also have appointments available. You can come in and set up an appointment with us to talk about anything having to do with teaching in college and higher education, or even in K through 12, we can help you out with those things too. We also have some people that are planning to be consultants that come and talk to us, which is quite nice because their teaching goes way beyond just higher education, even though that is our specialty. We also have webinars like this, and at the end, I'll have a link where you can go check out some of the other webinars that we're going to be doing this semester. We also have recorded some of the old webinars that we've done as well, so those are good ones to check out. All right, so here are just some quick little ground rules of what to do today. So go ahead and mute your audio when you're not speaking. Feel free to use the chat for discussion and questions throughout the webinar. I'll pause at different times to kind of answer those questions. And Crystal's going to jump in when there's time and let me know if I missed a question. There's also going to be a Q&A session at the end where we'll actually use our mics and have a bit more of an in-depth discussion. And if you need technical assistance, use the chat, or sometimes just leaving and jumping back in the meeting is really helpful. All right, so we're going to go over three main areas for supporting LGBTQ students in this webinar. I've broken it up into keep educating yourself, intentionally design your course, and be a visible and active ally. So we're going to go over each of these in detail and have specific points of what you can do for each of these. But I think having 3 points to remember is a really good place to start. And I always want to preface this by saying, while I am a member of the LGBTQ community, I don't know everything. And I am still continuing to learn. So I'm not the end-all be-all knowledge provider here. This is a community effort. And but it is important to realize that right now, as of right now, there are some standards that we can do to help our students. So first is keep educating yourself. As I was kind of saying, this is a lifelong process, even for those that are already in the community. So for instance, I am always going in and trying to keep up with the younger generation. They have a much different experience than I do, even though, it hasn't been that many years in the past. So they're always coming up with, each generation is coming up, with their own slang terms, cultural norms, identifiers, everything based on their own needs and experiences, which change over the years. So I always have to keep educating myself, even as a member of the community. And this is one of the most important aspects of being a great educator, is realizing that you don't know everything and that you need to keep educating yourself. So let's get into some details about things you should continue to think about and things you need to keep learning throughout your educator career. So first is terminology and culture. It's so important to understand the terms and culture of the queer community, because it really can lead to misunderstandings of situations or even just communication misunderstandings. So, it really helps you understand, are you reading the situation correctly? Do you actually know what they're saying? So this is a really important aspect. And I'm going to this is a list here for keep educating yourself, and then I'm going to go into even more detail for each one. So next is recognize systematic problems. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are not problems that are just on an individual level. These are systematic problems that exist in our society. And we need, as educators, we have to realize that they're systematic and that we need to address both the systematic problems and on an individual level. So the other thing is that we need to understand intersectionality. So students with multiple disadvantages are disproportionately affected. So are they a minority in terms of their religion, race, nationality, ability? All these things compound and make it even more challenging sometimes. So that's something we'll also discuss. Next is you need to follow news and legal issues. So these are things that actually come up and you might need to address in your class at the time because you need to, you just need to be educated on these issues, especially what's going on right now in 2020 to really be able to support your students fully. The next one is don't make assumptions. It's always better to ask, always, than to assume things. So assumptions create misunderstandings, they perpetuate systems of oppression and harm students' education and well-being. So now let's go into each of these in a little bit more detail. And what we're gonna do is we're actually going to start with terms. So here we go. We're gonna actually take a look at some of the terms from the community. I'm going to put in the chat a link to the Poll Everywhere. So go ahead and use your phone or your browser, type in that link that I just shared in the chat. And what you can do is click on the terms that you do not know. So click on the terms you would like me to talk about. I can't spend this whole webinar talking about terms, but this is a way for me to see which terms you're less familiar with. And then I can chat about a few of those. So I'm just going to watch for the responses pop up on my phone. And as I wait for those responses, can everyone, someone put it in the chat if you can get in and if everything's working with that Poll Everywhere. Let's see, yes, okay, it is working, great. So I'm gonna wait on those responses. And while I do this, you'll notice that I actually didn't put LGBTQ+ as one of the terms because there's actually a lot of terms under that umbrella. So, and even the order of those terms has important implications, but these are some of the things you should try to figure out on your own. Go do research, things like that. Oh, it looks like it's not active. Oh, yep, there we go. I see some results coming in. For instance, the L in LGBTQ wasn't always like that. It didn't always come first. Q was actually the one that came first for queer men, for gay men. And in response to the AIDS crisis and the support that the lesbian community provided for men in the AIDS crisis especially, they really supported the move to have the L come first in LGBTQ. So, all right, looking at the responses, it looks like I'll do a couple of these. So heteronormativity, we'll talk about that one first. Heteronormativity is the belief that sometimes subconscious, that heterosexuality, that opposite genders should be sexually attracted to each other, is the default or the preferred or the normal mode of sexual orientation. So that is basically the situation that we are operating in, is that most people just assume that everyone is straight, heterosexual, and they even can go as far as being preferred or the default, things like that. So that's the basic of heteronormativity. Let's see, the next one that some people, cisnormativity. So similarly, that's the idea that cis people, so cis being cisgendered people, people that are, they identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. Those are cis people compared to, for instance, gender nonconforming or other gender identities. And that's the idea that it's just assumed that people are cisgendered, that's the normal, default, preferred assumptions that people make. Let's see. Another one is, let's see, demisexual. So we'll do demisexual.
Shelby, the poll isn't working for everyone.
Okay.
Just to briefly, and then Brock also mentioned that they're unfamiliar with Z or AFAB, GNC, or demisexual.
All right, I'll go over a couple of those too then. Don't want to spend too much time on these, but for instance, demisexual is people who only experience sexual attraction after an emotional bond has been formed. So that's demisexual. The other one is GNC. That's gender nonconforming. So those are people who do not conform to the regular gender binary of male, female. And that includes a whole spectrum of identities in it as well. Okay, so those are quite a few of the terms. On the slides, I'll add a few definitions, add a few more definitions in the notes to cover some of these. But the main point of this slide is to show that there are a lot of terms associated with the queer community. And part of your work as an educator is to go in and understand all of these terms. The terms change, which ones are appropriate and which aren't, but it is important to make sure you understand them so that you can have conversations with your queer students where you understand them, they understand you, and so that you educate your students on these terms as well, because they might not know the terms either. So I picked some of the harder ones that are less known, but still this should give you an idea of places for you to grow with your own class. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Does anyone know these references? If so, pop them into the chat. Take a guess about who these people are or what these things reference. Yes, Luke, that is She-Ra, right? Correct. That is a cartoon that is, it's in Netflix even right now, but that's big in the queer community right now, especially with the younger generation, because it shows great queer representation and some diverse representation. Yes, Billy Porter, absolutely one of the most important actors right now from Pose, and is known for a lot of other things as well. Any other guesses to the other people or references? No? Okay, yes, Marsha P. Johnson, yes, absolutely. So one of the founders of the gay and lesbian movement, LGBTQ movement, was actually a leader at Stonewall and set up the Gay Liberation group, actually. Can't remember the name. Yeah, the person on the right, that is Marsha P. Johnson. Yes. And so the other two, the reference to the person holding the guitar is Girl in Red, right now one of a major influencer in queer music. And also the other one, yes, yeah, oh, yeah, autocorrect there. But yes, Audre Lorde, yes, absolutely. Right, absolutely. So again, this slide is to make a point that there is a lot of things going on in queer culture. And so if you don't know what's going on with queer culture, take some time to figure out what the references are and stuff like that, because you really want to, you know, connect with your students. But more than that, you know, we'll talk about this a bit later, is you need representation for your students as well. So, you know, it's just really important that you understand where they're coming from so you can connect with them so they feel seen and heard. So let's talk about some statistics. Some of these might be a little bit triggering for some people because we're going to talk about suicide and things like that. But stick with me. These are a little depressing, but it's really important we understand what we're actually facing with LGBTQ students. For instance, 1 in 3 report that they have faced physical harm or threatened with physical harm. So suicide, murder, physical and verbal attacks are some of the main things that students are facing. And, you know, it's harder to learn when you're actually fearing for your safety. We can think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, you know, if you don't have basic physical safety ensured for yourself, it's harder to learn. It's not impossible, but it is harder to learn. So that's something to be aware of with this group. The other thing is suicide. We see 40% in 2020 of LGBT people. So this is for ages, I believe it's 14 through 24. So this covers college age students. 40% have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And 50% of transgender and non-binary youth have also seriously considered suicide. So this is something to be aware of that our students are currently facing. They're facing, you know, anxiety from politics and a lot of other things just in general. And we'll get into more detail about it, but be aware that this is what your students are facing. They're also facing homelessness. So I've actually worked with a course that was talking about homelessness, and we spent a significant amount of time talking about LGBT youth and homelessness, because they're one of the biggest percentages of homeless individuals in our nation. And this is from either running away from home or being kicked out of the home when parents find out about them. It's also compounded in college because you have an issue of finding roommates who are accepting, and sometimes college policies about which dorms you can actually live in are also difficult. So these are all like depressing statistics, and unfortunately that's just where we're at right now. But there is an important hope, right? So for instance, using pronouns correctly can actually help transgender and non-binary youth reduce suicide by almost half. So if everyone in their lives are actually respecting their pronouns and their names, you can reduce suicide rates by half. That is huge. I mean, statistical significance is, you don't get better than that, right? But like, sometimes it's tempting to think of, oh, it won't make a difference, but it really, truly does. We'll talk about how you can better make sure you know someone's pronouns and use them correctly, but know that it really does have an impact on students. So let's talk about another study done in 2010 who looked at LGBTQ respondents of color. And this is actually those in higher education. So those respondents were 10 times more likely to indicate racial profiling compared to white respondents. And they are more likely than white counterparts to indicate race as a basis of harassment. However, it's important to note that the sexual identity was still the primary risk factor for harassment for both groups. So while LGBTQ people of color face even more discrimination and harassment, still sexual identity was a big impact on that. So we don't want to forget about respondents of color being a little bit different in their needs sometimes than what you might typically think of is white stereotypes of LGBTQ students. So I want to preface this by saying I'm not a person of color, so I don't understand the experience of QTPOC people. So that's queer, trans, people of color. But I think it's important to address their needs as well, because sometimes they are different from white LGBTQ students. There are some things we can actually do to help them. And this is a partial list that was created by the QTPOC caucus. So go take a look at this. It'll be in the resources at the end, but we're going to go over a few right now. So recognize that the stereotypes of white queer people do not often include people of color. So don't assume you know what someone's sexuality is ever, but also especially people of color. So be open to different types of communication. So for instance, African American Vernacular English. This is a dialect. This isn't just incorrect grammar or anything like that. So familiarize yourself with that. It's an important part of QT Pop culture and the culture of people of color in general, well, Black Americans especially. So another thing is don't appropriate terms. In the queer community, we are just as guilty of this as other communities. For instance, using Two-Spirit, that is a Native American term, and try not to use that language, or don't use that language. And then the other thing to remember is that queer, trans, people of color have had a huge impact on LGBTQ history and have set, in motion some of the things that have made the biggest impact on our community. So we always want to make sure that they are represented in history as well. And finally, even if we don't talk about it, racism does impact people of color, and we can't ignore that fact. So these are just a few quick things from this list. But again, I'll put these in the resources so you can take another look at them as well. So, all right, so I went over a lot of difficult things, but what all does this mean for a student's education? So first, a lot of students leave campuses if they don't feel safe. This is a third of students consider leaving their campuses because they don't feel welcome, all right? And it really impacts student performance, educational outcomes, social adjustment, interpersonal skills. These are all huge impacts. So we want to be aware of this so we can actually try and overcome those issues. Okay, let me see here. So really quickly, just talking about some legal issues. I'm not going to go over these in detail because I'm already feeling like I'm running behind. So just to cover a few of these, when you become an educator, I'm not going to assume that you're going to stay in California. California has some of the best legal representation for queer people. However, that is not the case in other states. For instance, in Oklahoma, there are very few, if any, legal protections for queer people. So if you go to teach in another state, be aware of the legal issues that students might be facing. Everything from employment discrimination to housing, public accommodations. So this is like going to restaurants and stores. If I go, visit Oklahoma, I can legally be denied service in a restaurant, for instance. And that says restraints, it's supposed to be restaurants. Sorry about that. Also, they're not protected in education. Some of the, some states even have laws that restrict the inclusion of LGBTQ topics in like high schools, and actually have laws that prevent school districts from specifically protecting LGBTQ students. So, QT Caucus, yeah, sorry, I guess how it is pretty far off. Sorry about that, the audio transcription. So be aware of the legal issues of where you're going to go teach at. Some of the other things is healthcare. Trans people aren't given healthcare coverage, and even some of those orange states exclude transgender coverage on Medicaid. So just be aware of these issues that your students might be facing. Right here in California, we have pretty good legal coverage, but it's not the same everywhere. All right. So let's talk about current issues that queer students are facing in this remote online learning environment that most people are in right now, especially in California. So I don't have actual hard data on this, but from what I've seen and talked to students and educators, there are fewer LGBTQ students going to their support groups right now. We are guessing that is because students are in the home and they either aren't out to their parents or don't want to discuss these issues around their parents. They're no longer in a safe space. So be aware that they actually might have less support right now. They might be delaying their transitions or coming out because of that at the same time. Or they have already started transitioning and coming out and then have had to kind of either go back in the closet because they've had to move and go back home with campuses closing, or, you know, stop their transition because they're having to go back home and might not have access to either the healthcare or other things they need to get those. They are probably upset about politics right now. Everyone's probably upset about politics right now, but it might hit the, especially queer and people of color more saliently, especially with the election coming up. So please be aware of that. Financial and housing insecurity. It is harder for queer and especially trans people to get and keep jobs a lot of times. So be aware that that's something that they might have issues with. And of course, increased anxiety and depression, as well as separation from significant others. So I know that I've just spent like almost half of this telling you what the situation is, but now let's talk about how we can actually address these things. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, we should have a growth kind of mindset with this. These students are resilient. They develop strong community bonds and are capable of amazing academic success and growth and development. And I don't want you to think too negatively about these students, and I want you to be part of their growth and success. And that's why we're here today, is to figure out how to do that in a good way moving forward. But you do need to be aware of the situation and what they're facing. So that is, all of that is to say, you need to keep educating yourself on all of the topics I've covered so far. So next, the second step in what you can do to support your students is intentionally design your course. So we're going to talk about several ways of how you can go in and design your course in a way to support your students. And so I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly, and then we can talk about it at the end and kind of run over some questions about how to do this in more detail if you'd like. So first is protect your students. Don't out your students. We talked about, you know, like the physical safety issue. So one of the things you need to do more than anything is assume all of your students are not out and make an effort to protect them if they want to stay in the closet. And so just make the assumption that they're not out until they let you know otherwise. So one of the ways you can do this is names. So we'll talk about it in a little bit later about the first day questionnaire, but see what names your students want to go by. Especially trans students might go by a different name than is actually on, you know, the Canvas page or on your roster. So there are ways to do that in confidential, ways to do that confidentially, so they can let you know what they want to do. Also, you know, just ensure their confidentiality on and off campus. Right now, some students are not on campus. They're in their living rooms, for instance, and make sure that you respect the confidentiality of whatever they tell you. So if you have a private conversation with them, or they let you know something in an assignment, say they did an essay and they came out to you in their essay, do not assume that means that they're out everywhere. You should keep that to yourself, and you can talk to the student in private about that. Don't bring it up in class, you know, don't make a public post about it somewhere, but ensure their confidentiality. It's a sign of trust that they have come out to you in whatever way they've done it, and don't break that trust by sharing it publicly or even just with the class unless they, you know, have explicitly said otherwise. So yeah, be especially careful when learning online, considering what people can and can't say, for instance, in Canvas, or what parents might overhear if you're talking online or in a Zoom meeting. All right, so let's talk about that first day questionnaire. So this is, no matter what kind of students you're helping support, this is something I think that is so important and one of the best things that you can do. So on the first day of class or in that first week, you should do a questionnaire that's confidential, either through like an assignment on Canvas, or if you're in person doing a note card or like a little worksheet, and ask students about themselves. So before you do like a roll call or anything like that, you should really check and see what name students want to go by. I would say don't ever do a roll call on the first week. Actually avoid it altogether if you can. But if you need to, do this instead to take roll or attendance or see who's in your class. So, ask them what their name is on the roster or their student ID number so you can actually identify them and confirm that they're in the class. But then ask what names they want to use and have ask them what the pronunciation of that is and have them write that down. And, this isn't just for queer students. This is also for, international students who might use a different name than their actual birth name or their official name because they don't want to use it or they're tired of people mispronouncing their actual name. So respect that. And but if a student does have a difficult to pronounce name, you need to learn it and confirm with them how to pronounce it. That is your responsibility as an educator because names and pronouns are really important and we should support our students in that way. Also, when talking about pronouns, don't say preferred pronouns. It's just pronouns. It's not like trans people have preferred pronouns and then cisgendered people have pronouns. Everyone just uses pronouns. Also ask them, is there anything you want me to know as your professor? Anything I can help you succeed with in class? So students, you might ask about students' accommodations, if they need any accommodations, ask them for a fun fact, what stage they are in college, or are they on a sports team associated with the college. I actually had some great information given to me using this type of questionnaire in my own classes where, I learned that several people on a sports team and that they were going to need more days off. And so that let me go look up the policies and everything before class got started. So this is a great way for them to let you know whatever they think you need to know to help them succeed in class. And it's a good way to just get to know who your students are. Do you have a bunch of freshmen in your class? Do you have a bunch of seniors? That's good information for you to know so that you can better design your course. All right, moving right along. So resources. Do you know where the LGBTQ support center is in your university or college campus, like the physical location of it? Do you know where the website is and stuff? Otherwise, if there's not a support group for students, consider starting one. And you can start one on your own or, get some other faculty together and do this because they usually do need faculty advisors for these groups. But this is really important for students to have a place, even if it's just like a single room or office where they can get together and talk and know that they can go for support. Whether it's maybe a difficult class assignment, maybe they aren't comfortable talking to you about something, but they need someone that they can go talk to about, advice. Maybe it's something that's going on in the home or in their dorm room. So be sure to know where that is, put it on your syllabus. And then also add other resources to your syllabus. So what if someone's having a mental health crisis, they've lost their housing or they're food insecure? Put that in your syllabus. Be aware of what resources are on campus and off campus, in the local community. Something I would also be careful about is sometimes people call campus security to say, hey, can you escort this student, maybe to the mental health center or something. Please don't do that. Please go ahead and walk them over yourself. A lot of, especially students of color and queer students have trauma associated with campus police or police in general. And it's just better if you walk them over yourself. You can have a conversation with them. Let's not increase the risk factors that our students are facing right now. So, all right, course policies. So set expectations of correction. So on the first day of class, let students know that, if they say something incorrectly, that you are going to correct them, but it's not out of shame or anything like that, but this is a place of education. And so you aren't going to let those things slide, but it's coming out of a place of care and concern. And this is the place to learn, right? So let them know that you will correct them. Just do it and move on, right? So that is if they know that that's going to happen, it becomes more okay. And don't have it be that they're, scared of speaking out at that point, but just know that they know that that's going to happen, and that'll actually make other students feel safe in your course. Set discussion expectations. So, some of the things you could talk about in your expectations is, avoid generalization, use I language. So if someone's speaking, they can say, well, in my opinion, or I did this, or I think that, instead of making big generalizations. Have generous late policies. So students are going through a lot right now. We are here to measure learning. We're not here to measure who has the most stable environment for learning. So that's something to consider is, do you really need to penalize students for turning things in late? And can you be generous about that? So that's something to consider as well. And that helps all students right now, not just queer students. I would also encourage you to use OER textbooks, so open educational resources. Students are having a hard time financially. Everyone is having a hard time financially. So having OER textbooks where they're free to use really helps students not have to buy $200 worth of textbooks on top of tuition. Finally, something I would encourage you to do is scaffold group projects. So if you have group projects in your classes, make sure students know that they can come talk to you about those group dynamics. Have a process already set up for if there's any problem in group dynamics. And if students need to, switch groups or prefer to work alone, be generous with those policies so that you can make sure that the students are learning. And that's the most important part, is learning, especially right now with everything that's so difficult. So, all right, I know this is a ton of information so far. We're almost through this section, so just keep going with me and let me know if you have questions in the chat. All right, let's talk about representation in course content. So I would encourage you to take a look at your syllabus and your PowerPoints. So are LGBTQ students represented in the images, videos, stories, statistical sets that you're using? Do they see themselves in your content? And not just LGBTQ students, you need to do this for all of your students. And I haven't come across a subject yet where you couldn't put this representation in your class and make sure that you got everyone covered. So like just as simple as the stock images that you're putting in your slides, are you representing everyone, or do you just have, for instance, just white hands in your slides? The next things is, what authors and theorists and class readings are you having them do? Do you have good representation in these, or do you just have white cisgendered men in your list of readings? Also, do you cover LGBTQ issues in your subject? Again, I haven't run across a college subject yet where LGBTQ issues just don't exist. Even in math, like when you write an exam, do you have a variety of different names? Are you using different statistical sets that include, queer representation and in those things, especially for like a stats class? If you're doing something about even research methods, for instance, talk about the ethical issues of research for the queer community, because there have been some unethical, research studies that have been done, and what were the implications for the community, and how can we make sure not to replicate those? So no matter what your subject is, there are things you should be talking about for your queer students and your students of color. All right, so we're gonna take a little bit of a break. We're running up against time, but I wanna make sure that we take some questions, or do you have any other ideas that you've seen other people use to support LGBTQ students? Go ahead and type it in the chat. Anything that I haven't thought of yet, or anything that thought of while I was speaking. All right, I don't see anything yet, but we'll keep going, and then we can come back to some of these ideas later. But think about like what other course design ideas have you used or seen other people use? And we can add to this because this type of thing is, it's a growing, ever evolving system, and we'd love to be able to add more things to this list. Okay, so the last section here is be a visible and active ally. This is what you can do to be sure that students know where you stand. Because to be honest, as a student, I'm going to assume that you are not an ally until you show me otherwise, because that is the safest thing I can assume. So this is how you can show your students, besides everything that I've already talked about, that you are there for them and you support them. So first thing is, safe place certificates. You can put these on your office door. You can put these as a sticker on your computer. You can put them in the background. Those are things you can do. If you have an office, put out flyers or brochures, rainbow flags, stickers, images. If you don't have anything and you would like something, consider going to the queer support group. They might have some things you can do, put a pin on your shirt or your jacket or your bag. Some other things that you can do, especially in the online space, is put your pronouns in your Zoom name. So this signals to students, especially trans students, that you understand their issues and that you're trying, right? Even if your pronouns are cisgendered pronouns, it's still important. Also use your pronouns just like I did when I started this webinar. Again, it's just a signal that you understand where the students are coming from, and it gives them the opportunity to do the same, and it kind of sets the tone for your whole class. Finally, go to trainings and events. So there are tons of events and trainings on your own campus where you might be teaching, here at CGU, and just all over the place. So go to those things, show up. Your students will probably be there too and can see you, right? So the next thing is to be an active ally. And this is some of the hardest things to do, to be honest. But they're the most impactful things you can do. So if you mess up, if you misgender someone, if you use the wrong pronouns, if you use the wrong term, correct yourself and move on. It shows that you care, but you don't dwell on it and make it a huge deal. And you set an example for everyone else. Like, just correct yourself, apologize, and move on. Ask privately if students want you to correct others if they're misgendered in class. So if you do that first day questionnaire and they say, my pronouns are she, her, and so another student misgenders them, ask them privately if they want you to correct people in the class, because they might not want to make it a big deal. They might not want to be re-traumatized by calling that out in that way. So see what they want before you actually do that. Next, check your gendered language. So when you're talking to your class, don't say hi, hey guys, hi ladies. If you are in class, like on the ground, when you go up to a group, even if it's all women in that group, and also it should be women, not girls. That's infantilization of women. But go up to them and just say, hi folks, or hey everyone, don't use gendered language because you might be misgendering someone in that group. Finally, just don't make assumptions about someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, or their partner. So don't assume someone has a boyfriend or a girlfriend. That's something you can do as well. All right, so I know that was a ton of information. Just to review here real quick, how can you better support your LGBTQ students? Keep educating yourself, intentionally design your course, and be a visible, active ally. So that's kind of what we covered today. I wanted to leave time for questions and everything, and we still do have time for that. So I'm very excited to get to talk to you a bit more. But just a few quick things at the end here. I want you to consider, what was the most important idea or action you'll walk away with today? I covered a lot of stuff, but what is something you can implement right away? And what is something that you need to go learn more about? Because even as a member of the queer community, there is always room for growth. So think about that. We also have, I'll put these slides up on our website, and all these are clickable links. So these are some of the references and some resources for you to follow up on later. So we actually have 3 pages of this. It might seem like a lot, but it's pretty quick to go through and just see for yourself about the statistics, and some like workbook kind of things for you to do for your own stuff. So real quick, I'm going to transition into taking questions and having a discussion. But before I do so, check out our upcoming webinars. Be sure to check out the college teaching certificate that we offer. Make an online appointment with us. I would love to continue talking to you all about this type of thing for LGBTQ students, but all other students too, international students, students of color. Also follow us on our Instagram, cgu.pff, and feel free to email us as well.